Why did the USA get involved in Vietnam during Eisenhower's presidency? This is a short presentation about the reasons for US involvement in Vietnam. It starts with the splitting of Vietnam into North and South in 1954. This, of course, was via the Geneva Agreement, and the North was led by the communist Ho Chi Minh and the South ruled by capitalist Ngo Dien Diem. Laos and Cambodia, the surrounding countries, were to remain neutral. This was meant to be a lasting peace. This was meant to be a permanent solution. Surely? However, there was a small problem with the Geneva Agreement, one clause in particular that the USA conveniently ignored as long as they could. An election was to be held in 1956 to reunify Vietnam as one country. What this actually meant then, of course, was competition time between the two leaders, Diem and Ho Chi Minh. It also meant a popularity contest. It also therefore meant the South must win, otherwise Vietnam would become communist. Oh, and it gets worse. The USA is really worried about this election. The reason is not because of the USA sitcom Everybody Loves Raymond. It's because everybody loves Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh, the leader of North Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh, the communist leader of North Vietnam. In fact, Eisenhower later, looking back on it all, speculated that possibly 80% of the population would have voted for the communist Ho Chi Minh as their leader. This would be an absolute disaster. Vietnam would turn communist. And the USA's anxieties are compounded because if Ho Chi Minh wins the 1956 election, yes, Vietnam will reunify as a communist country, that's bad enough, but other surrounding countries will do the same. Communism will start spreading westward like dominoes. And as you can see from the diagram below, this was a real fear that the USA had. They believed that if Vietnam turned communist, then Laos next door would turn communist, then Cambodia would do the same, then Thailand would do the same, then Burma, then India, then Bangladesh, getting closer and closer to the West. This is known as the domino theory. It's the theory that once one country falls to communism, others will follow. The USA's second main worry was in fact Diem, the leader they had put in charge of South Vietnam. He was becoming increasingly unpopular amongst the South Vietnamese people, and it was actually unsurprising considering he ignored plans for a 1956 election despite it being guaranteed by the Geneva Accords of 1954. He arrested and killed all of those who protested against this decision. He ignored advice from anyone, including American advisors, and then he banned Buddhism, the majority religion in South Vietnam. This led to people protesting in extreme ways, such as a Buddhist monk setting fire to himself. The USA's third main worry was the fact that North Vietnam knew that Diem was unpopular and started to plot against him to try and turn South Vietnam communist. And it was working. The Ho Chi Minh Trail through Laos, the neighbouring country, was used to send North Vietnamese aid to communist supporters in the south. The National Liberation Front, or the NLF, then formed in South Vietnam against Diem. So there was aid coming from the north, and there was an insurgent within the south. USA worry number 4. If they let Vietnam turn communist, which it looks like it would, then what will the world think about capitalism and the USA? An epic failure. The USA cannot be seen as a failure. The USA is the world's policeman sorting out problems. They can't fail. They've also committed themselves to a policy of containment outlined publicly worldwide in the 1947 Truman Doctrine. They cannot fail at this either. So the USA had to show the world that containment was working. Therefore Eisenhower felt that they just could not give up on Vietnam. Now there's a little backstory to containment which involves the story of the USA and USSR after World War II. Essentially, these two countries were allies during World War II because they had a common enemy, Germany, as can be seen by the poster with Hitler being squeezed in their handshake. However, this was the only thing in common. Because in fact, the USA and the USSR were ideologically opposed, and this means that their beliefs were quite the opposite. The USA was capitalist and the USSR was communist. Now, very briefly, capitalism means you can accumulate your own wealth and better your position. In communism, wealth is distributed by your state and you stay where you are. So after World War II, after defeating their common enemy, these two countries started to get paranoid that the other would try and push their ideology onto the rest of the world, and obviously this felt very threatening. They started to see signs that this is possible. Russia, for example, was trying to take and retain power in Eastern Europe. So in 1947, President Truman declared that he would try and take measures to contain communism. He did this through his Truman Doctrine. Containing communism is exactly what the policy of containment is all about, and it can be summed up by this image of putting a lid on a bottle. So imagine communism is in that bottle. You are trying to literally contain it. You're not trying to get rid of it, because it would be impossible to do so. However, you're trying to stop it spreading from any further. The way that you try and stop it spreading is by giving economic and military aid. And you'd give those military aid and the economic aid to countries being threatened by communism. And these were usually poor countries who saw communism as a positive future. Of course, Vietnam was the perfect example of where communism was taking hold, and Truman knew that this was an urgent example of showing that the policy of containment worked. And if they were involved already, which they were, and it didn't work, then it would be a failure, and failure wasn't an option for the USA. Of course, historians have theories about why the USA involved itself. Halberstam, in The Making of a Quagmire, his work of 1964, believed that a combination of ignorance plus overconfidence led to the USA becoming trapped in the Vietnam War. Journalist Ellsberg, pictured on the left, in 1972, plus a little bit later Gelb and Betts in 1979, believed in a stalemate theory. They believed the USA were in the war not necessarily to win it, but more remained in it so as not to lose it. And this can be backed up by the US Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, who assessed at the time that there was only 10% chance of success in South Vietnam. Finally, the nature of the US involvement under the presidency of Eisenhower. He didn't send atomic bombs, he didn't send combat troops, but what he did send was billions of dollars of aid and advisors, including military advisors, to Diem's South Vietnamese leader, and you can see the two shaking hands on the right. In doing so, he was basically giving a US guarantee of an independent state of South Vietnam. And of course, either way, he was going against the Geneva Agreement of 1954 by supporting Diem's decision not to hold elections in 1956. Overall, the US involvement under Eisenhower was limited but certainly committed.